friends, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of The MonkeyBoy Presents the DC Comics Superhero Collection by Eaglemoss, and today I'm very excited to bring you the 16th special edition in the collection, which is actually a 2-in-1, Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite, a really fantastic pair of figures, a really cool addition to this collection. Whether or not it's worthy of being a special edition is debatable. We'll of course get to that later on. First, as is traditional, we'll take a look at the packaging that the figure comes in. As you can see, it's a little bit different than most because it has a slipcase. And this slipcase is different than the previous special editions. There's artwork on the front depicting both Bat-Mite and Mxyzptlk. Then the one side of the packaging has the collection logo with the DC seal of approval there, and then the back has, again, the logo and the same artwork but in a slightly different position, so it's a little bit different on the back, which is interesting. And then the other side of the box is just that dark marble slate sort of pattern on it with all the copyright information and everything. So it's a little bit different packaging. As I said, it's a slipcase. You can see, you can slip the outside off, and it's the typical picture box sort of blister packaging there that the normal figures come in. And so you can see how small this figure is. Here's the special edition Bat-Mite Mxyzptlk packaging next to the regular packaging from just one of the normal characters in the regular line. That's a lot to say, Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite. Try saying that 3 times fast. Anyway, for those of you who are aware of these characters, well, chances are you may know Mr. Mxyzptlk from one of his earliest appearances on the old Filmation animated series, The New Adventures of Superman. He went on to appear in the Super Friends animated series, where he was voiced by none other than Frank Welker, legendary voice actor. If you don't know who he is, look up one word: Megatron. That'll clear the whole thing up. He later appeared in live action in the old 1990s, I think it was, the early 90s live action television show Superboy, where he appeared in a couple of episodes. He then appeared in live action in the 1990s live action Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, portrayed by comedian Howie Mandel. He was later realized in one of my favorite interpretations of the character on the 90s animated series Superman, the animated series, where he appeared in numerous episodes. He was fantastic, voiced by Gilbert Gottfried. Really cool. If you're not familiar with Mxyzptlk, those are the episodes to check out. Watch that show. He reappeared in live action a few years later on Smallville, where he was sort of reimagined a little bit as this strange teenager who had powers of some sort. And finally, most recently appeared in the Batman, the Brave and the Bold cartoon show that used to air on Cartoon Network, where he appeared in a couple of episodes, really great appearances as well. For those of you who are aware of Bat-Mite, chances are you may recognize him from his earliest appearances, and again, the 1970s cartoon show by Filmation, The New Adventures of Batman, where he was voiced by Lou Scheimer. If you don't know who Lou Scheimer is, I have one word for you to look up: He-Man. He also briefly had a sort of cameo in an episode of the Batman animated series from the 1990s, where he was an animatronic robot thing that this scientist created in an episode. He just had a quick little cameo, and most famously and most recently appeared again on Batman the Brave and the Bold in numerous episodes, where I think he was represented perfectly as not so much a villain but more of a nuisance, an uber fanboy, and he was voiced by none other than Paul Reubens, better known as Pee Wee Herman. Great stuff. Check that show out, guys. It was really, really fantastic. And very briefly, I wanted to mention a character known as Larry, who is another fifth-dimensional imp, like Bat-Mite and Mxyzptlk, who was created for the Teen Titans animated series, and is basically like Bat-Mite, except he is Robin's uber fan. With all of that out of the way, for those of you who are unaware of these characters, Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite, well, that of course is why we're going to take a look at the magazine first, which will tell you everything you need to know about these fifth-dimensional magical creatures. And it's an interesting magazine too, as I mentioned before. It's laid out very differently. There's a character section for both, there's a classic section for both, and it goes on from there. So it's kind of cool. And then of course we'll take a look at the figure itself, covering the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's a really cool pair of figures. I'm glad they were included in this line. I hope you all sit back, relax, and enjoy my review of the 16th special edition in the DC Comics Superhero Collection by Eaglemoss, Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite. First up, Mr. Mxyzptlk's character section. We learn of Superman's first encounter with Mr. Mxyzptlk when the imp was posing as a successful businessman known as Ben DeRoy. Using his magical abilities, he swept Lois Lane off of her feet and left a wave of chaos in his path. DeRoy was eventually exposed to be Mr. Mxyzptlk by Superman, and he also showed Superman how powerful he was. The magazine goes on to talk about a number of other encounters the Man of Steel has had with Mxyzptlk, like a time when Mr. Mxyzptlk used his powers to warp reality and turn Superman into a cartoon character, forcing him to fight against another animated show of blue-skinned characters called dwarfs. Superman ultimately triumphed over Mr. Mxyzptlk and escaped this dimension by tricking the imp into painting his face blue. We also learn of a time when Mr. Mxyzptlk went up against Lex Luthor while Superman was out of town. In addition to being able to warp reality around him, Mr. Mxyzptlk can also warp himself, like a time when he made himself a miniature red sun in an effort to weaken Superman, and another time when he swore to take revenge on all of Metropolis by becoming giant-sized. Always toying with reality and the Man of Steel, we learn of another occasion when Mxyzptlk changed history so that he was elected president. In this warped new timeline, only Superman and Lex Luthor's son, Lex Luthor II, remember history as it was meant to be. After Lex Luthor II is captured and threatened with electrocution, Superman saves him in the nick of time by ultimately outwitting, yet again, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mr. Mxyzptlk also created his own version of a Doomsday named Bada Bing Bada Boomsday, so that he could experience death in an effort to understand what the Man of Steel went through when he was killed by Doomsday. By renouncing his fifth-dimensional powers, Mr. Mxyzptlk was able to be killed at the hands of Bada Bing Bada Boomsday, and found his soul going into the light. Upon entering the light, he came face-to-face with his creator, the then editor for the Superman comic books. Mr. Mxyzptlk was told, though, that it was not yet his time, and was returned back to Metropolis, with his impish fifth-dimensional powers returned to him as well. The last page more or less brings us up to speed with the character. We find that even Mxyzptlk can be manipulated when the Joker temporarily managed to steal his impish powers from him, and that he can be stripped of his powers after the Day of Vengeance event removed all of his magical abilities from him and he was stranded on Earth. He would of course regain his powers once again, only to participate in the event known as Final Crisis, where he was for a time held as a prisoner by the evil Superboy Prime. Next, we look at a couple of Mr. Mxyzptlk's classic stories. First, we look at Superman, the Fortune Plague. This story opens with chaos in Metropolis, where people are rioting in the streets after it seems everyone has won the lottery jackpot at the same time. Lois Lane and Clark Kent, reporters for the Daily Planet, of course, going to investigate, and they discover that buildings are moving on their own, and everyone seems to be getting everything they can think of. Ultimately, it's revealed that Mr. Mxyzptlk has arrived in Metropolis in an effort to try and bring Lois and Clark closer together, fearing that the couple that he loves to watch so much might be drifting further apart. He uses his powers to turn Clark into the damsel in distress for Lois to save, helps them to reenact a scene from Romeo and Juliet, and even turns Superman into a super baby for Lois to care for. It's a very well-illustrated and hilariously told story that has a very bittersweet ending I don't want to ruin for you here, and is really worth checking out. We also look at Young Justice Volume 2, Issue 3. This is a very trippy, time-altering story that's goofy in many respects, that takes place on Halloween with the heroes of Young Justice after they accidentally conjure an unnamed, scholarly, scientific-type student from another dimension. He won't tell them his name, he won't tell them what he's doing there. It turns out he is secretly studying to see how far he can use his highly advanced scientific trickery to push these local humans into a state of panic. It's Robin who recognizes the student as a much younger version of Superman's foe, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Over the course of the story, they teach this student how to relax and enjoy the merits of a little slapstick humor, and accidentally create Superman's clown nemesis, Mr. Mxyzptlk, in the process. It's well illustrated and is a fun story if you're interested in learning more about Mxyzptlk. Next, we look at Bat-Mite's character section. Where we discover that similarly to Mr. Mxyzptlk, Bat-Mite is a magical imp from the 5th dimension who idolizes Batman and is basically a superfan. Bat-Mite paid numerous visits to Batman trying to help his hero fight against crime, but most of the time just got in the way and caused supernatural problems. Over time, he became a semi-regular in the Batman comic books, and was eventually declared a full-fledged member of Batman and his extended superhero family. He also managed to leap out of the pages of the comic book and cause havoc in the offices of DC Comics. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths reboot the DC Universe, Bat-Mite was portrayed as nothing more than an hallucination. This was most evident when a drug dealer in Gotham City named Overdog was overdosing on his own product while on the run from Batman, when who should he encounter but the diminutive Bat-Mite, who, according to Overdog in his drug-induced haze, transformed into a gigantic monster known as Dark-Mite. The Dark Knight would later encounter his own hallucinogenic version of the Bat-Mite after he had been driven insane by the villainous Dr. Simon Hurt. It was ultimately revealed that Bat-Mite had been programmed into Batman's subconscious in an effort to protect him from revealing his secret identity. Next, we look at a couple of Bat-Mite's classic stories. First up, Superman and Batman, World's Funnest. This story, known as Last Imp Standing, opens with Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite fighting because they have both accidentally killed Batman and Superman. In an effort to prove that one is worse than the other, they begin to systematically kill every hero and villain in the DC Universe. After destroying the Earth accidentally, they then move on to destroy galaxy after galaxy, and once this universe is destroyed, they move on to the DC multiverse until the pair have found that they have destroyed everything, laugh out loud to themselves, and then begin to recreate the universe so that they can do it all again next week. It's a great story done by a lot of talented people and is definitely worth checking out. We also look at Batman Might Fall. This is an incredibly strange tale that is either one big hallucination by the drug dealer Bob Overdog, or just one very weird action-adventure story. We learn that Bat-Mite's dimension has come under attack from a version of Bane there known as Bane-Mite, who has broken Bat-Mite's back. He escapes to our reality, and while here he learns that the drug dealer known as Bob Overdog has escaped from Arkham. The pair run into each other, and Bob agrees to help Bat-Mite, traveling to his home dimension and ultimately helping to kill Bane-Mite. The ending is really interesting. I don't want to spoil it for you here. Needless to say, if you want to know more about Bat-Mite and see a very weirdly illustrated but entertaining story, you should check this one out. Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite's Friends and Foes section features their respective heroes, Superman and Batman, Superman's love, Lois Lane, and the fifth-dimensional imp versions of the Justice League. Finally, the Original Thinking section features other creatures of the fifth dimension, beginning with the fifth-dimensional imp known as Quisp, who like to occasionally help underwater hero Aquaman. Fifth-dimensional genie Yiz the Thunderbolt, better known simply as Thunderbolt, who is currently attached to human Jakeem Thunder. Mr. Mxyzptlk's wife, the super-intelligent and sexy Mxyzptlk. A fifth-dimensional team of heroes known as the Fifth Dimension Rebels. Enemy of Ultraman, the antimatter universe version of Mr. Mxyzptlk, known simply as Mxyzptlk. The Mr. Mxyzptlk powered version of Joker when he called himself Emperor Joker. And lastly, hailing from Bizarro World, the Bizarro version of Mr. Mxyzptlk. Here we have Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite, and I really like these two a lot. I think they're a great addition to this collection. I love that they decided to include them. Are they worthy of being a special edition? I suppose that's up for debate. They aren't very big. In fact, they're the absolute smallest special edition in the entire collection. They're actually among the smallest out of the entire collection, period. Not just the special editions, but the whole collection. I think Detective Chimp is the only one that's around the same size as they are, but their details are outstanding. The paint is really incredible, the sculpt is nice, all kinds of awesome little details all over the characters, from the look of them, which is great. They look cartoony, especially Bat-Mite. He looks like an old Hanna-Barbera or Saturday morning cartoon or something, and Mxyzptlk does too. I like how he's riding on that cloud. The color of his costume is really well done. It's this yellowish orange with great highlights and shadowing and shading. His hair is wild and big, the little hat on his head, the bowler hat. His sculpt, his face, his musculature is really well done too. Same thing with Bat-Mite. His ears, how the one is drooping. The mask is like the old school 70s Adam West sort of mask. The symbol on his chest, his black shorts that he has, even the silly boots. I love everything about it. I think it's really fantastic. You know, you could argue whether or not it's special edition. I'm just happy to have them. I'll talk a little bit more about what I do like and the problems I do have in the next section in just a moment. Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite both stand atop the classic DC logo, and the underside of the base features their names and serial number. To give you a sense of size and scale, here they are next to Superman and Batman's arch-nemeses, the Joker and Lex Luthor, alongside a couple of the other special editions in the collection, Anti-Monitor and Doomsday, and finally alongside the world's finest, Batman and Superman. Mr. Mxyzptlk, who I'm referring to as Mixie from here on out because it's easier, and Bat-Mite are both very impressive figures. It's nice that they were included in this collection, even if it meant having them as a special edition. Although they are very small, the detailing and the fact that we get a 2-in-1 basically of a couple of really obscure but cult favorite characters I think is awesome. We'll start, of course, with the good. The sculpt is outstanding, the paint, the molding, the details, the character in both of them, their expressions, and the way they're posed, it's all very, very impressive. They really are an outstanding pair, and the fact that we get two figures in one I think is great too. You can see starting at the base, Bat-Mite's boots, how they're like elfish boots. They have those big exaggerated tips like you'd see on Santa Claus's elves or something like that. And the fact that Mr. Mxyzptlk, Mixie, is riding on this cloud, and unfortunately it doesn't really show off here with the camera, but there's all sorts of great details in that puff of smoke that he's riding upon. Lots of shadowing and shading, different textures, different colors. There's actually some spots where it looks like it's wet. Bat-Mite's cape is also nicely textured, nicely detailed, great paint job there. Love the fact that he's in the classic blue and gray Batman outfit with some of the black highlighting. He has that sort of comical pot belly with the classic utility belt, that squiggly line for the bat symbol. Even the interior of the cape is detailed, and his outstretched arm is a separate piece and detailed itself. You can see the glove and all the ridges. The black shorts I absolutely think are great. And the same thing with Mixie. Great detailing, even though he is sitting Indian style with his legs crossed like that. There are awesome paint decos here, the textures are fantastic, there's wrinkling on his shirt, and the color of the costume is well represented too. It's this hot yellowish orange, but it's not too orangish, and it's not too yellowish. It's really well done, and the wrinkles are well highlighted. His musculature too, and his arms are fantastic. The flesh tone is really nice. And the head sculpts on both of them are impressive. Bat-Mite looks cartoonish. He looks like an old Hanna-Barbera cartoon or an Archie comic or something. Really well done. The big ears, how the one is bent and sort of drooping. The smile on his face. The fact that he just looks like this fanboy, this mischievous sort of imp is just fantastic. Whereas Mxyzptlk, Mixie, looks almost angry, sort of perturbed. Like he's sick and tired, he's frustrated of Superman and him being so perfect. And there's all sorts of fantastic details all around the face. His expression, the wrinkles, the crinkles in his brow, his hair, how it's so big and cartoonish and almost clownish. White, great textures, great highlights and shadows and shade. Love the little purple derby on the top of his head, how it's off to the side. And his eyes are really well done too. They're sculpted, they're not just painted. Really fantastic. No decals on these guys either. Not a single decal anywhere. A really nice pair. Moving on to the bad, which is a short list, but there are a few minor issues. You can see a little bit of glue bleeding out from underneath Bat-Mite's cape, but it's only noticeable from the right angle. Same thing goes for Mixie's eyes. While they are nicely sculpted, mine are just a little bit crossed or cockeyed. They're not quite right, but again, that might just be mine. I'm sure yours might be perfect, and you only see it if you're really looking. The only other argument you could make, and I totally understand, is that they're very small, and they're not really worthy of special edition because they are so small. And I understand that argument, but they're beautifully detailed. It's like having two Detective Chimps, honestly, and you can see they're even smaller than Detective Chimp, really. So while I do consider this a quote-unquote bad thing, I don't think it's a reason not to get these characters. Finally, the ugly. Believe it or not, this is actually a really solid pair of figures. As tiny as they are, there's nothing really fragile about them. Overall, these guys are outstanding. I think they are really impressive, a great pair of characters to include. The fact that it's a villain and a hero, arguably, is also really nice, and a great way to swell the ranks of both. The details are outstanding. If you're a fan of these characters, I think you should pick them up. If you're a fan of Superman and Batman, I think, again, it's a really nice piece to have in your collection, because even if you're not that familiar with Bat-Mite, any good Superman fan knows who Mr. Mxyzptlk is, and it's really cool that they were included in this line. It's also nice to have them just because you can have the smallest special edition figures in the collection and the largest if you got Anti-Monitor, or the Centennial Park Superman. It's arguable, but I'd go with Anti-Monitor. And that's also kind of a cool reason to pick them up and include them in your collection. Are they for everybody? Not necessarily, and I don't think you should overpay for them because, again, they are very small. But if you have the money to spend, if you find them at a reasonable price, if you're a fan of these characters, they are awesomely represented here. Definitely pick them up, add them to your collection. I think they're just great, and I hope that you have enjoyed my review here of the 16th special edition in the DC Comics Superhero Collection by Eaglemoss, Mr. Mxyzptlk and Bat-Mite, a great pair. Please stay tuned for a quick teaser trailer of the next figure in the regular collection. It's another hero. It's a teenaged hero, a member of the Teen Titans, and while the magazine touches on both interpretations of this particular teenaged hero, we only get one in figure form, but it's really cool. I hope you stay tuned for that quick underwater aquatic hero. As always, I am your host, the Monkey Boy, aka Jay to his friends. Thanks for watching.